I call your attention to a man sitting on death row right now in California. His journey from youth gang member to international street peacemaker is a remarkable one. Remember his name.
Stanley Tookie Williams. I used to be the king of the Crips. Look at my kingdom now. This is not a gladiator school. You will not prove anything in here. This place does not make you a man.
In 2005, the world watched as Stanley Tookie Williams, once a notorious gang leader, faced the final moments of his life. Convicted of 4 brutal murders, Williams had spent over 2 decades on death row, his name synonymous with violence and crime. Yet, in his final years, something changed. Behind prison walls, he became an unlikely advocate for peace, writing books to steer children away from gangs and even receiving a nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize. But was it enough to save him? Was this the story of a man who truly reformed? Or was it just a last attempt to escape the consequences of his violent past? As the clock ticked down to midnight on December 13, 2005, the world was left to wonder, could a man like Stanley Tookie Williams ever truly find redemption? Stanley Tookie Williams was born on December 29, 1953 in Louisiana, but his life would be shaped by the streets of South Los Angeles. Growing up in a neighborhood where violence and poverty were everyday realities, Williams faced the harshest of circumstances. His father was absent, and his mother struggled to raise him in an environment rife with crime. By the early 1970s, Williams found himself drawn into a life of gang culture, seeking both protection and a sense of belonging. In 1971, he co-founded the Crips, a gang that would grow into one of the most infamous and violent in the United States. What began as a means of self-preservation soon spiraled into a violent empire, and Williams, known as Tookie, became one of its feared leaders. The Crips' influence spread rapidly, and Williams' grip on the streets tightened. But as his power grew, so did the violence that followed. In 1979, Williams, high on PCP, went on a killing spree. The first victim, a 26-year-old clerk named Albert Owens, was murdered in cold blood during a robbery at a 7-Eleven. Just days later, Williams and his crew killed a Chinese immigrant family, a mother, father, and their adult daughter, during a motel robbery that netted less than $50. In the face of such brutality, the justice system had no choice but to convict him. Williams was sentenced to death in 1981 for the 4 murders. A life once defined by fear and power now faced the ultimate consequence. And while his crimes made him one of the most notorious men in California, his time on death row would lead to an unexpected journey of reflection and change. Sentenced to death in 1981, Stanley Tookie Williams found himself in San Quentin, a place where the realities of his past would catch up to him. But it was also here, behind the cold walls of death row, that something began to change. At first, Williams was consumed by anger and despair, as many would expect. He was a man facing the consequences of his violent actions, the weight of his past pressing down on him. But over time, the man who once ruled the streets of Los Angeles found himself confronting something far more difficult than the harsh realities of prison life, his own conscience. Williams' transformation didn't happen overnight. It began with long hours spent reflecting on the life he had led and the lives he had destroyed. In 1993, Williams took the first step towards redemption by writing Tookie's New Year's Resolution, a children's book about making positive life choices. The book, written from his prison cell, would be the first of several that aimed to steer young people away from gangs. For the first time, he was using his voice not to glorify violence, but to warn others against it. As he continued to write, Williams began to speak out against gang violence. He participated in prison programs designed to help young inmates change their lives. His efforts gained the attention of many, both inside the prison system and beyond. Celebrities like Jamie Foxx and Snoop Dogg publicly supported him, acknowledging his shift from the violent man he once was to a person advocating for peace and reform. But not everyone was convinced. Critics pointed to his past actions and argued that no amount of writing or speeches could erase the blood on his hands. Some claimed that Williams' transformation was nothing more than a last-ditch attempt to avoid execution. After all, the man who once lived by a code of silence refused to fully cooperate with law enforcement, leaving some to question whether his redemption was real or just a strategy. Still, Williams remained resolute in his belief that change was possible. In 2001, he even founded the Tookie Williams Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping youth avoid gang involvement. His past was undeniable, but Williams was determined to use it to change the future for others. December 12, 2005. The final 24 hours of Stanley Tookie Williams' life began under the unyielding walls of San Quentin. The day started like any other on death row. He declined a special last meal. Later, after the final appeals were denied, the reality settled in. The countdown was no longer a possibility, but a certainty. As afternoon stretched on, preparations continued. At 6:00 p.m., he was strip-searched, given fresh clothes, and moved to a holding cell just steps from the execution chamber, under constant guard. He spent the evening quietly. Letters from supporters had arrived from around the world. He read them under watchful eyes. According to prison officials, he drank milk in the hours before his death, but refused a special last meal and declined spiritual counsel. Meanwhile, outside, the world waited. Supporters, activists, and opponents alike knew what was coming. Behind those walls, Williams faced the consequence of decades-old crimes that made him one of California's most notorious inmates. When his name was called, the final journey began. In the chamber, prison staff prepared the lethal injection. The execution team struggled for more than 10 minutes to locate a suitable vein in his muscular arm, a delay that stretched the final moments longer than usual. At one point, he reportedly lifted his head and asked, "Still can't find it?" At 12:35 a.m. on December 13, 2005, Stanley Tookie Williams was pronounced dead. No last words echoed in the chamber. His execution, long awaited, fiercely contested, had ended. In those final hours, the reflection of a life once rooted in violence came sharply into focus. The man who once ruled the streets now lay silent, forcing questions that echo far beyond the prison walls. At 12:35 a.m., Stanley Tookie Williams' life was extinguished. For a man who had once been a symbol of fear, his final moments were marked by an eerie calm. But the story of Tookie Williams raises more questions than it answers. Was he truly redeemed? Or was it all a last attempt to escape the consequences of his violent past? After decades on death row, Williams's transformation into an advocate for peace and a critic of gang violence seemed genuine to some. His books, his efforts to reach young people, and his vocal stance against gangs painted a portrait of a man who had changed. But for others, his past was too dark to forget, his brutal crimes too unforgivable. In the end, Stanley Williams's execution wasn't just the end of one man's life. It was a reflection of a larger debate on justice, redemption, and the possibility of change. Even though Tookie Williams seems to have redeemed himself in many ways, it doesn't change the fact that he killed 4 people. But here's the thing. Looking back, his redemption and the books he wrote could also be seen as his way of making up for those crimes. As much as he took 4 lives, he helped millions of kids steer clear of gangs and gun violence. So it really begs the question, was his redemption genuine? Or does the weight of his past crimes outweigh everything he did afterward? There are so many more stories like this. Cases that still need to be told. Stories locked away, waiting for the right moment to come to light. But here's the problem. In order to dive deeper into these cases and gain access to the files and details that could shed more light on these untold stories, I've been told we need to hit 1,000 subscribers. So here's what I'm asking from you. Do you think Tookie Williams deserved a second chance, given his turnaround in jail? Or do you believe there's no redemption for someone who's taken 4 lives? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe these stories deserve to be uncovered, like, share, and comment. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Once we hit 1,000 subscribers, we'll have the access we need to explore these stories fully, and your support will make that happen.